Some relationships don't end with a fight. They don't end with a lie, or a betrayal you can name, or a moment you can point to and say, "That's where it broke." Some relationships end with a phone call, not even your phone call, his again. This is Breakup Diaries, and this week, we are talking about the relationship that had 3 people in it from the very first date, and only one of them was me. My name is Isla. I am 28 years old. And the first thing I loved about Callum, the very first thing, before I knew his middle name or how he took his coffee, was the way he talked to his mother on the phone. We were on our second date. He excused himself for 4 minutes to take a call from her. When he came back, he was warm and slightly embarrassed, and he said, "Sorry, she just wanted to know how my day was." And I remember thinking, this man is safe. A man who checks in with his mother like that, who answers without resentment, who comes back to the table smiling, this is a man who knows how to love people. I was right about that. He did know how to love people. What I didn't understand yet was that his mother had spent 31 years making sure that love had one primary destination, and it was not going to be me. I'm telling you this story from a year after it ended. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not. But because I spent 18 months inside something I couldn't name while I was in it, and the day I finally found the word for it, I felt less alone. So if you're in it right now, or you have been, this one's for you. I mistook his inability to have a private life for an abundance of love. Those two things look identical from the outside. The difference only becomes clear when you are already inside the relationship, trying to find a room in it that belongs only to you, and realizing slowly, then all at once, that there isn't one. About 4 months in, I started counting. One Saturday, I counted 11 calls between Callum and his mother before we sat down for dinner at 7 in the evening. 11. I opened my phone notes and typed the number and stared at it. Then I closed the app and said nothing. I said nothing because I had already rehearsed the conversation in my own head and heard how it ended. He would look at me with genuine confusion. He would say, "She's my mum, Isla." And I would have no counter to that because she was his mum, and loving your mother is not a crime, and the problem, if there was a problem, was clearly mine. That is what I believed at the time. I have different beliefs now. His mother, Margaret, was unfailingly warm to my face. She asked about my work, my family, my plans. She remembered every detail I mentioned and brought it up the next time we met in the careful way of someone who is building a picture rather than making conversation. I found it flattering. It took me 6 more months to understand that every question Margaret asked me was a question she was asking through me, and the answers were going home in Callum's pocket every single night. Before we go further, have you ever counted something in a relationship and then talked yourself out of what the number was telling you? Drop your answer below. Subscribe and hit the bell, because what Margaret does next is the part nobody in this niche ever talks about. Bell. She wasn't just receiving information. She was collecting it. And Callum was the channel she used to fill it. Not because he was malicious, because he had been doing it since he was old enough to speak. There is a difference between a man who tells his mother everything and a mother who trained her son to tell her everything. I did not understand that difference for the first 8 months of our relationship. When I finally did, it changed the shape of every single memory I had of Margaret being warm to me. Callum's older sister, Harriet, said it plainly at a family birthday I attended 6 months in. We were in the kitchen, just the two of us, and she said, without any particular edge, "Callum has never had a secret from Mum. Not one. Ever." She said it the way you say something that is simply a fact of the landscape, like mentioning that it rains a lot in November. I smiled and said something like, "That's sweet." I didn't know yet that Harriet was handing me a map. What I began to understand over the following months was that Margaret had not raised a son who happened to be close to her. She had raised a son who understood, on the deepest possible level, that keeping things from her was a form of leaving her. She had told him this. In different ways, across his entire childhood, she had made the message clear. A son who has secrets has already started to go. Callum did not share everything with his mother because he lacked boundaries. He shared everything because he had been taught that the boundaries themselves were the betrayal, and by the time I arrived, that lesson was 31 years old. It was not a habit. It was a foundation. I went home that night and lay beside Callum while he slept, and I thought about the tone of what Harriet had said. She described it the way you describe a structural feature of a house rather than a flaw in it. And I realized, to everyone who grew up inside this family, this was not a problem. It was simply how things were. I was the only one who thought it needed fixing, and I was already 18 months too late. The dinner where everything changed was a Sunday in October. Margaret had made a roast. The table was full. Conversation was warm and easy the way it always was at her house, and I was sitting next to Callum feeling almost settled, almost like this could simply be my life. And then Margaret said something. It was a small comment, offhand, about something that had happened in our apartment the previous Tuesday. Something private, not dramatic, not shameful, just ours. A conversation Callum and I had alone in our own home that I had told no one about. Not my best friend Priya, not my sister, no one. I felt the blood drain from my face and then very deliberately felt it come back. I smiled. I responded with something neutral. I picked up my fork and finished the meal and thanked Margaret for the roast and got into the car. I waited until we were 2 streets away. Then I asked him one question. He didn't hesitate, he didn't even lower his voice. He said, "Yeah, I mentioned it to her, we were talking and it came up." It came up. Something that had happened inside our home, between us, behind a closed door, had come up on a phone call to his mother the following morning. I stared at the traffic light and I thought about 11 calls on a Saturday, about Harriet's map, about the way Margaret's questions were always slightly too specific. And I thought, she has never not known. From the very beginning, she has always known everything, because he told her, because he always will. He didn't understand why I was upset. He genuinely did not. He looked at me across that car and said, "I don't keep secrets from my mum, Isla, I never have." And underneath those words I heard the sentence he didn't know he was also saying. The one that ended us, he never will. I did not ask him to stop loving his mother. I want to be completely clear about that. I asked for one thing, one room in our relationship that was only ours. Not every room one. The conversations we had alone in our own home about our own life. Just those, just private. He said yes, he meant it, I believe that completely. He had a conversation with Margaret. I don't know exactly what he said, but I know she cried. Because he came home quieter than usual, and I could see the weight of her crying on him like something physical he was carrying across the threshold. He held the boundary for 49 hours. I know the exact number because I counted. The same way I once counted 11 calls on a Saturday and said nothing. I had gotten better at counting. I had not gotten any better at what to do with the numbers. On hour 49, his phone rang. He answered it in the kitchen. His voice dropped in the automatic way of someone managing another person's feelings. He was in there for 22 minutes. When he came back, he sat down next to me and said, "She was just upset." I looked at him, he looked at me, and in that moment I understood something I had been trying not to understand for 8 months. He loved me. Genuinely, completely, without question. But the thing Margaret had built in him over 31 years was stronger than 18 months of loving me could touch. He could not sustain her disappointment. He was never trained to. That was the entire point. He loved me, completely. And it wasn't enough. Because the person he loved most, in the way that was installed in him before I ever arrived, was the person on the other end of that call. And she was never going to stop calling. And he was never going to stop answering. I left on a Thursday. Not dramatically, Callum was at work. I packed the things that were specifically mine and left his key on the kitchen counter and sat in my car for 11 minutes before I drove away. 11. I noticed the number. I let it mean what it meant. Callum called 14 times that evening. He was devastated. I don't doubt that for a single second. He called his mother on the 15th call. I know because Harriet told me, months later, without cruelty, just as a fact of the landscape. He always called his mother when something was wrong. He always would. For a long time I blamed Margaret. It was easier. She had built the system. She had maintained it. She had cried on hour 49 when her son tried to give me one private room. But somewhere in the months after, I stopped blaming her and started understanding something more complicated. She loved her son the only way she knew how, completely, totally, without space for anyone else to be primary. That is not love without cost, but it is love. What it was not, was something I could live inside. 6 months later, I met someone who told me, unprompted, on our third date, that he didn't tell people everything about his relationships. That some things were private. That privacy was a form of respect. I almost cried. I didn't because it seemed like too much to explain. But I understood exactly what I had been missing. Not love, a room that was only ours. Let me ask you a question. Was Callum a victim of how he was raised, or a grown man who made the same choice every single day and called it love? And is there actually a difference? Drop your answer below. I'm Isla. This is Breakup Diaries. See you in the next one. Belle.